David Catrone recently wrote a provocative essay in the American Spectator entitled The Sanctuary State Confederacy. His argument, in a nutshell: most Americans think of the Civil War as an unambiguous conflict between North and South over slavery, and that's true. But it was also an insurrection by 11 Democrat-led states to protect their non-citizen labor force. Their leaders feared the new Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, would take that labor away. They vowed to resist the federal government and accused Lincoln of being a dictator. Why does that sound so familiar? Hello, America, and welcome to the latest episode of the American Restraint podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Trepanier, author of the book American Restraint, back there. On this show, we discuss how to fix America. We don't do hot takes on political news. We try to look at how to fix America by shrinking Washington, D.C., and going back to federalism. We also look closely at some of the root causes of America's brokenness. And today we're looking at the root causes and consequences of illegal immigration. As always, please subscribe to help get the word out. Okay, so let's look at the true cost of cheap labor for the middle class. Immigration is one of the most contentious issues in America today, but much of that contentiousness stems from the dishonesty of both political parties. A few decades ago, Democrats often opposed illegal immigration because they knew it would swell the unskilled labor pool and suppress wages for a big part of their voting bloc, American workers. Republicans, meanwhile, looked the other way, happy to let millions of undocumented workers fill low-paying jobs if it meant lower labor costs and higher corporate profits. But today, the roles are reversed. Democrats now embrace undocumented workers as part of their identity politics coalition. And Republicans, led by Donald Trump, have made immigration a centerpiece of their message to protect the middle and working class and protect our borders. Senator Marco Rubio has warned about what's at stake. The loss of dignified, productive work poses an existential threat to the common good of our nation. Ensuring that these jobs exist acknowledges the profound, inseparable connections in our society between work, family, community, and country. But immigration is only one piece of the puzzle. The middle class has been hit with a three-front war on good-paying jobs. First, millions of low-skilled immigrants competing in the U.S. labor market. Second, millions of manufacturing jobs outsourced abroad. And third, hundreds of thousands of high-skilled jobs insourced to lower-paid foreign workers. Political and business elites don't care about race when they make these moves. They care about cheap labor, and the working and middle classes are paying the price. So let's talk now a little bit about globalization and the hollowing out of the middle class. So for the past 50 years, globalization has reshaped economies across the world, but in the US, it's been supercharged by hyper-capitalism. For corporate leaders, free trade isn't a moral principle, it's a profit strategy. The supposed benefit for the middle class? Lower prices, mostly in the form of cheap plastic stuff from China. But the real cost has been the erosion of steady, dignified work. Take China, for example, after they were let into the World Trade Organization. From about 2001 to 2024, the U.S. outsourced an estimated 4 million jobs to China alone, mostly in manufacturing. These were jobs that once anchored communities, sustained families, and built generational wealth. They were traded away for the promise of market access in China and for the fantasy that a more capitalist China would naturally become more democratic and less of a threat. That prediction failed spectacularly. Libertarian economists often highlight the benefits of outsourcing as lower prices Americans pay for clothing, electronics, and household goods. But for a factory worker in Ohio or Michigan who lost a $60,000 job and ended up working for $25,000 a year at Walmart, those savings are a cruel joke. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit of numbers. We're going to show a graph here, and I think it's important whenever you have this discussion about illegal immigration to really base it and ground it in numbers rather than get kind of carried away with a lot of the emotion that often accompanies this discussion. So this graph here, if you look at the blue and the orange lines, I think they're both really important to show the number of immigrants and their share of the total U.S. population from about 1850 to now, about the past 170 years. So you can see the orange line in the late 19th century was going up pretty high. The percentage of illegal immigrants in the United States went up to about 15%. And a lot of people know in history, right? There was a fair amount of friction that was going on in America with lots of immigrants speaking German or speaking Italian or coming from Ireland. Just different ways and different peoples caused a lot of turbulence for the country. But I think we worked it out, right? A lot of these people came from abroad for a better life, to farm and land, and work hard. And then if you look at the blue line, that's the total number of immigrants that came into the country. And it started off, the total number is pretty low. But then as you look at both of these orange and blue lines, they kind of went down the Depression and World War II as America was getting its act together, trying to fight the Depression, fight World War II. And they dipped right around 1960. But the interesting thing is the percentage of illegal immigrants and the overall number of illegal immigrants skyrocketed starting in the mid-60s at the behest of libertarian economists who really pushed this cheap labor ideology. The other thing that's really important, I think, about this graph is you look at the percentage of illegal immigrants in the country, and whenever you get right around, 10 to 15% in the late 19th century and for the past 30 or 40 years, it causes friction in the country. And I don't think that you should say, oh, just because you want to limit the amount of illegal immigrants that come into this country, still have, good numbers of legal immigrants coming in this country, waiting in a line and going through the process legally. Whenever you have too many as a percentage of the overall country, too many people who don't speak the same language, don't have the same customs, and don't buy into the American dream, it causes friction and frays the social fabric. So I think it's important that we have a sensible conversation about how much is too much. It's not racist to say a certain number of people should and shouldn't come into the country, but we should be orderly about it and make sure that the country can grow and prosper and have more stability and cohesion without having 15%, 50%. What number is acceptable? So I think it's important to look at these numbers because they really ground the conversation. Okay, so back to the conversation. Let's talk a little bit about the numbers of illegal immigrants. So not every job could be outsourced to China, as we just talked about. For industries like farming, hospitality, meat processing, and construction, the solution was pretty simple. Import the cheap labor. Low-skilled illegal immigrants, largely from Mexico and other parts of Latin America, came seeking work that paid more than they could earn back home. Many were willing to work for wages far below American standards, and that steady influx kept wages depressed and opportunities scarce for millions of U.S. citizens without college degrees. Like the migrant families in the great book, The Grapes of Wrath, these immigrants were often the victims of circumstance, but they were also used as pawns in a larger game, a game in which American business executives got richer and political leaders got more power while working Americans got pushed aside. Now we're going to talk a little bit about insourcing, the H-1B visa scam. So Insourcing of high-skilled tech jobs started around 1990. President George H.W. Bush signed the H-1B visa program into law. The stated goal was to help technology companies address labor shortages in specialized fields. But what was the reality? It became a backdoor way to replace well-paid American IT professionals with low-cost foreign workers. The scam works like this. Large staffing firms, Tata Consultancy, Infosys, and others, recruit skilled workers in countries like India, hire them at far lower salaries than U.S. equivalents, then place them at major American corporations as contractors. Disney, Verizon, Bank of America, Southern California Edison, all these companies have used H-1B hires to replace American workers. And in many cases, the displaced workers were forced to train their replacements under the threat of losing severance pay. From 2001 to 2024, about 3 million H-1B visas were issued. Tech giants like Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft employ tens of thousands of these contractors rather than hiring equally qualified Americans. For corporate America, it's a win-win. Lower payroll costs and fewer obligations to workers. But for the middle class, it's another step towards economic displacement. Hypercapitalism's unholy trinity that we've talked about today, outsourcing jobs, illegal immigrant, and insourcing, each of these three forces alone would challenge the middle class. Together, they form the perfect storm, eroding wages, hollowing out communities, and concentrating wealth and power in the oligarchy. And behind all of it, it's the same mindset of hyper-capitalism. Maximize profit, minimize labor costs, and let someone else deal with the negative consequences to families and communities. Okay, so for the next couple of episodes, we're going to be talking about how states can push back on hyper-capitalism because Washington won't do it. States still have power if they choose to use it. The key to building up the middle class is to reduce the concentration of income, wealth, and power that has recently gone to the upper classes. American companies don't care about American workers anymore. Companies in restraint formula states should focus on workers in addition to customers, shareholders, and the community. Examples of the type of legislation to be considered could include the following. 1. Close the loopholes. Block policies and practices that encourage outsourcing, illegal immigration, and insourcing that replace local workers. 2. Prioritize citizen employment. Develop company tax incentives that prioritize jobs for American citizens first. 3. Reform immigration at the state level. Accept manageable numbers of legal immigrants who commit to family, community, health, and learning English, one of the best ways to improve our social fabric and help immigrants' long-term success. 4th and last, limit welfare to short-term aid. Offer a safety net to help new legal immigrants get on their feet, but not long-term dependence, which invariably impacts government debt. Legal immigration has always been part of America's story, but the version we're living in now, driven by corporate greed and political posturing, it's unsustainable. The final thoughts I have here on this topic: the American middle class was once the envy of the world. It was built on steady work, fair wages, and the belief that if you worked hard, you could get ahead. However, today that promise is slipping away, and it's not an accident. It's the result of deliberate choices by business leaders who value profit over people, and by political leaders who trade long-term prosperity for short-term gain. If we want to fix America, we have to rebuild the middle class, and that means ending the race to the bottom in labor. America can be fixed, but only if we choose restraint. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.